Welcome to the EarthWorks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi everybody, I'm Joel Simmons, and I am very excited to announce that this is our 100th episode of the EarthWorks podcast. And I want to take this time to say thank you to everybody who has joined us over the last 2 years. And as I've said a few times here on our podcast, we started this podcast at the very beginning of the COVID experience because we wanted to make sure we could continue to keep contact with all of you, and it has been a wonderful experience. We are happy to say that we are getting over 1,000 views each week here on the podcast, and we've tried our best to bring some of the most entertaining and most informative guests to the table. EarthWorks, as you all know, has been in business since 1988, and we are promoting the concepts of biological soil management, and most of our guests that we've brought on are clients of ours who have experienced the benefits and understand the significance of biological soil management and just simply how good soil health works. So again, we want to say thank you to everybody who has joined us and who has spent some time here with us on the EarthWorks podcast and who has taken the time to subscribe to the EarthWorks podcast, because we're going to be continuing to bring great guests as long as we possibly can. Now, 4 of us here at EarthWorks are recording podcasts, so we've got a whole team that are bringing some great people to share their stories with you. And today, we're bringing back 2 of our best guests. Mr. Armen Suny and Mr. David Wilber will be joining Kevin Hicks and me on the 100th episode of the EarthWorks podcast. I hope you enjoy, and again, thank you so much for being a part of our family. Hi, everybody. I'm Joel Simmons, and I am so excited to announce that this is the 100th episode of the EarthWorks podcast, and to celebrate it, we wanted to bring back 2 of our most popular and favorite guests, Mr. Armen Suny and Mr. Dave Wilber, and Mr. Kevin Hicks and I, who have been hosting your podcast here at EarthWorks for a while. Again, are very grateful for all the participation from all of our former guests, and certainly from everybody that listens. I don't know if you guys know this, but we hit about 1,000 listens every week, and for some strange reason, the top listens are the 2 of you, and it's neck and neck. I think Dave has got a couple more podcasts than you do, Armen, so you guys can fight it out for 1 and 2 or 2 and 1, depending on how it goes. But thank you guys for coming and being part of our celebratory 100th podcast. This is actually pretty exciting. I mean, when we started this, we had no idea what we're going to find. And I went back and listened to some of the old podcasts, and they were really rough. They were really pretty bad. And you know, we got better as time goes on. We got fancier microphones and you know, and able to, you know, get some lighting, and I shaved my ugly beard. I mean, it's been a lot of changes since then. But when you know, the whole virus thing came along and COVID hit us hard, we were petrified because we didn't know what we were going to do and how we were going to stay in touch with people. And Jack Higgins, our other podcast host, said to me, "Why don't we do a podcast?" I'm like, "That's a great idea. What the hell's a podcast?" So we just started doing a podcast, and there we go. So having said all of that, how are you guys? Armen, what's news in the world? And we're getting a little feedback. Dave, is that coming out of you?
No, it's not coming out of me.
I don't know where that's coming from.
I'll lock down here.
Maybe too much. But anyway, how are you guys? Everything good? Armen?
All good here. And I think we can rekindle the spirit of those early podcasts today, Dave, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. We can.
We're a little worried about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rough it up a little bit.
Right.
Dave, how you doing? Everything good? How's the
yeah, I'm good. I you know, like most people, you know, Easter signifies all kinds of, you know, things as far as like when we need to be doing stuff in our business, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Just amazing how the switch comes on right around April 1st. And
It's like the
Crazy.
only week when every superintendent is excited about being a superintendent. All of a sudden, oh, I can't wait, and a month from now it'll probably be a little bit different.
Right.
But it's fun talking to the guys out in the field right now, because they're all getting busy and excited and having fun, and it's all new, and they're making their first cuts and aerifying, and it's just a lot of excitement going on.
Except in the southern states where it's like, oh man, are they ever going to go home?
Right.
Yeah.
Are they ever going to go away?
And
Another
nobody's going home in the southern tier. They're all staying.
Yeah.
Plays way up through summer rounds are way up everywhere in the desert, in Florida, where I just was yesterday. So it's up.
I'm heading down to Florida on Monday. How is the Florida market? Is there a lot of stuff going on?
Yeah, there is. This is the time, superintendent wise, when things start shaking up a little bit down there. And but it was 86 degrees. I left Colorado, it was 18 in the morning, and I was down there, it was 86. A little different.
It's still 18 degrees in Colorado.
Was the other morning, yes.
It was, yeah. It was a really cold morning, cold and clear.
Kevin got 6 inches of snow yesterday. We're recording on Saturday, Easter Saturday. So for those of you who are listening, we're recording in the middle of April, and Kevin had 6 inches of snow yesterday.
But it was gone by dinner.
And it was gone by dinner.
Yeah.
Kind of Colorado style.
And here in the East Coast, we had an 85-degree day a couple of days ago. So things are changing. So Armen, let's talk a little bit about one of the most popular topics in our industry, unfortunately, right now. And you're certainly an expert on this, is how the hell are we going to find people to run golf courses in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a major shortage coming at us, which bodes well for superintendents that are in their positions already, and that there'll be higher demand, which usually relates to higher salaries if you follow the economics of the deal.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with a lot of people. I think one of the things that happened was when we had higher expectations for golf course maintenance teams, we went to more seasonal workforces as opposed to summer workforces. And we exposed a lot less young people to our business in the northern tier. Mm-hmm. And that's come home to roost. It really has. That, along with, golf really fell off there for a while, and we lost 10% of our golf courses. And, you start looking at the amount of turf programs that went away.
There are hardly any left.
Yeah, the reduced attendance at the ones that are there.
Yeah.
So we need to do a better job of getting people involved in the industry, but we're going to have a shortage for probably 10, 15 years of superintendents. When I got into the business, or just before I get into the business, back in the 70s, people came out of college right into superintendent's jobs, which was not a good thing. And
it happened.
Yeah, there was, all the old uneducated superintendents retired or were pushed out, and they took people right out of college into superintendent's jobs. Not a good thing. I don't think it'll be that bad this time, but it's coming at us, and there's a shortage. We've had that shortage with general managers here for a while.
Yeah.
Nobody goes to college and says, I'm going to go to college and become a general manager. We see people want to be golf professionals. We have in the past seen lots of people that want to be superintendents. So it's coming at us, short of a market collapse, which is always possible. Where guys my age, our age, Joel, continue working because their portfolios crashed. That could buffer the shortage somewhat.
Yeah.
And Armen, I think that's the second or third tier of this, is that all of us are in the age bracket that are at least thinking about retirement, and a lot of our peers are getting to that point. And so now you've got the shortage of assistant superintendents, and the pipeline is thin, and you've got a number of superintendents that have been in the business for 30 plus years that are thinking about retirement. The economy's they're, like you said, their portfolio looks good. Maybe this is the time for me to bow out. The pressures are different, and so it's like this multi-tiered challenge that I think we're facing right now.
I remember the day, and it wasn't that long ago, if there was a new job opened up, there would be 350 resumes on the guy's desk. I mean, and now there aren't any. I mean, there are literally some guys that are, looking for somebody, an assistant, even a superintendent at certain clubs, and there's zero people applying.
But we've been here before, like Armen said. I mean, when I went to school, and before we got on the air, I reminded him that for him 31 years ago, but at that place right there, actually. But you just, if you had a certificate or a degree back in the 80s and late 80s, early 90s, you just had to decide where you wanted to be. There were so many opportunities, and we're certainly there again.
Yeah, just throw a dart at the map and
say,
this is where I want to go. And
the opportunity was there.
Always.
The difference being now that I think there's not, like you said, Armen, there's not as many educational opportunities to fill that pipeline.
Armen, you're in the business of recruiting, with your company, and you've been doing this for a number of years now. How much of it has changed even in the few years that you've been doing recruiting?
Yeah, the few years I started, my first real search was 1987.
A few years, that's what I said.
A few years,
Time goes by when you're old, you know that.
I did a so-so one 1985, but my first real one was 1987. The world's changed, but you got to remember, you'd get all those resumes, and of the 300, there was 20 that were worth investigating.
But it'll take 20.
Yeah.
A lot of those were the usual suspects, right? The frequent flyers. So the world's changed a lot, but one of the things, Joel, is we've changed how we do things as well. I think the process has evolved. We've gotten much better at trying to nail that combination of skill set and culture. There was still a lot of people that can do the job, but finding somebody who can do the job and fits in, that's going to blend with the membership and with the management team that's in place and going to thrive in the environment in the area they're going to. They're the things that we focus on, really. I'm not letting anybody in a room that can't do the job technically. Yeah. So it really becomes about culture and fit.
Because most clubs don't want to do this again in 4 or 5 years, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's 4 and 5 years going to look like, though? That's the question. What happens from 5 years from now? I mean, we're going to have a big wave of guys in the older age group that are going to be gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the demand's going to go through the roof.
Yeah.
We need to do a better job as an industry of bringing young people into the business. As we all know, it doesn't take long to become pretty good at this business.
Mm-hmm.
If you start out as a kid and you go to school and you work a good assistant's job, you can be ready in your mid-20s to take on a good job.
Yeah.
That's always been the beauty of this, is that when people started, it's not like you go to school for some subject matter that you have no idea about. These are people that have worked in the field generally. So when they go to school, they're learning things they were doing, they just didn't know why. Yeah. And so when they come out and they get their first job, getting exposure to management, to running teams, to getting integrated into the business aspect of things, within a few years, they can become very competent and ready for their first job. So that window isn't that great where we need to react. But, if we start today, 4 or 5 years from now, maybe we'll have a supply of talent. Right now, I routinely have turned down assistant superintendent searches because I don't think I can do a good job for some people.
That seems to be the biggest thing. I mean, there's so many conversations going on in the industry and so many guys coming into the industry as recruiters trying to find assistants, it's just, the one question I get every time I go anywhere: hey, do you know anybody?
Yeah. I get it too. All the time.
Okay, so that's the second tier of management. Now we've covered the Chiefs. What about all the Indians that we're missing? And the expectation. I think we totally missed an opportunity through COVID with an adjustment to expectations at a lot of clubs. From a daily maintenance type of regime to, gosh, do we really need all those accessories out? And as soon as things kind of returned to normal, all that stuff got plugged right back in again, which requires labor that we don't have. So where's that coming from?
Yeah, that's a challenge. I think one of the things that you hit on there too is you missed, Kevin, was single rider carts.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a tough habit to give up at clubs.
Private clubs had that figured out, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And Dave, I don't know, finding the workforce is a challenge, but maybe, all the immigration will, legal or illegal immigration will give us a workforce at some point here, at least in the Southwest and the Western part of the country.
Well, I think, this goes back when I first had the opportunity to meet Walter Woods and do some work in Scotland, 1996, 97 timeframe. The thing that I saw right away is that Walter took me all over, to see different places, and because he knew everybody, and it was great. And all of these staffs, I remember we went over to Carnoustie. And John Philp, who had worked for Walter for years, was the course manager at Carnoustie, and we go over there, and John has like not a very big crew, right? Mm-hmm. A bunch of equipment, not a very big crew, and it's like, wow, these guys are getting a lot of work done. And the average age of the crew was a little bit older, than we might see. And there were some, I guess by Scottish standards, there were some immigrants, there were some Polish guys working for him and stuff. But the thing that I saw right away is that all of them were very technically together. And Walter and I had a really, really long conversation on the drive back about his feeling that not everybody could be a golf course superintendent, but everybody ought to be vocationally able to do the work, to do the job. And that cross training and all those things were really important to him to minimize staffing. And during his time as head of the Links Trust, and all the golf courses at St. Andrews, he really had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how not to overstaff. And part of that was making sure that everybody that worked for him were really, really well trained in all the various things, that they could work in the shop, that they could, they had all the greenkeeping skills. And he kept talking about, we're losing the greenkeeping skill. Mm-hmm. And that not everybody is going to be a golf course superintendent, but anybody who steps on the golf course needs to be a qualified greenkeeper. And at first I wasn't quite getting it, but then I started to see. It also took Eddie Adams was at the old course at that time. And Eddie said to me one day, he said, I don't know how you Americans do it, because like, if I get hit by a bus today, my crew can do everything I know how to do. Right. But in the States, if the superintendent gets taken out, nobody would know what to do. That was his impression from visiting in the States. And so what I see happening is I see people saying, wow, this trade that we're in really is a viable trade. And that person that I thought of as just a mower operator could actually be a lot more valuable if I teach them something, a lot more something, and I could get by with a few less people. And that's kind of what's been happening. So
by necessity, right?
Yeah. And I look around my world right now, and you want to call it the post-COVID world or whatever, but try to hire a tradesman.
Yeah.
Right now, those guys are the guys I know that are in the trades, right, are driving the new pickups.
Right. Exactly.
If they can find them.
Right.
Yeah, if you can buy one. Yeah, exactly.
And I think we really have to look at this as a vocation, and we have to look back at, I don't know, Armen, I was going to ask you about this. I mean, when you got to Cherry Hills, Hank was there, right? Henry Rankin was there. I mean, how long had Hank been there before you got there?
30 some years.
And how long was he there after?
Another 20. Yeah.
And
Dave, you hit on something there. And I'm counseling clubs all of the time now that they should run a 2-track assistant world. They should have the permanent assistant like Hank was, who knows where all the bodies are buried. And then you bring the talent assistants in and you rotate them through. Right. I believe that's in the best interest of clubs. And after being exposed to the Cherry Hills, I didn't learn my lesson. Quite frankly, I should have learned the lesson.
Right.
But hindsight, we all get a lot smarter in hindsight, even me. And so I'm counseling clubs all of the time. And along with that, I'm counseling clubs that, you used to have two assistants that you work to death, or one assistant that you work to death. Well, that's not flying today.
No, definitely
Uh,
not.
You need to, and cross training your team and having a team that's more well developed and compensated. That would allow people to actually have a life and still be in our business.
I think
Right.
the younger superintendents, I've had that same conversation several times in the last couple of weeks with younger superintendents who get that. They don't want to be there 80, 90 hours a week. So they know they've got to empower their team to get the job done when they're not on site. And I think that's, that coupled with the fact that the younger generation, say the 25 to 40-year-olds that are managing, their perspective on life is totally different. And I think in a really good way.
We interviewed Ross Miller not too long ago here on this podcast, and Ross talks about having a rotation of his assistants where they all get 2 days off in a row.
Right.
So it's not this old model of, it's the badge of honor to work, 300 hours a week. I mean, that's suicide. And I think the other thing that we're seeing, and I've had this conversation recently with superintendents, where they used to always want to get their assistants in and out in a matter of a year or two. They're not doing that anymore because they know how hard it is. So, your idea, Armen, of having kind of this dual path, I think is brilliant. The guys that want to be, or the folks that want to be, I shouldn't say guys, because there's a lot of great women in this business now.
Yeah, we need to be careful with that.
Yeah, exactly. That's the old man talking, but I apologize. But, the folks that want to be in the industry, some of them want to be an assistant for life. And I think that's a great path. You can have a great career and a great life.
Well, let me throw something out there. It's a little bit higher level for us.
Oh, please do.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. Post the Industrial Revolution.
Uh-oh, you're going back.
Yeah. The world changed. Everybody moved from the farms where work and life were fully integrated.
Right. I know where you're going.
There was a work time and there was a home time. I think these younger people, the millennials that get picked on, are really throwbacks
Right.
to the agrarian lifestyle in their work ethic. They have no problem being under social media at work. They have no problem doing some work things while they're at home. Maybe they're right. And we were all the ones that had lost our minds.
I got to tell you, Armen, I've never subscribed to the work hard, play hard divisional thing. I've always been about work-life integration, right? And that's because I grew up in a farm ranch kind of situation, and that's how we kind of did it. And it was like, I have a hard time, separating those things, because I want to work when I work and I want to play when I'm working, and it all just sort of blends together with me. And I think that's why so many people are, you're right, not understanding millennial thinking, is because they've got it all meshed. There's not that big line of
it's that piece of technology in your hand that's really shifted that back. Now it doesn't look like you sit. It's not you sitting on the farm waiting for mom to to make the bacon and eggs in the morning, but it's very similar in how your life is integrated with everything you do.
Yeah,
I have this conversation even with my business partners, and the teams that we have on are great, but their lives are different, and and we're figuring out ways to adapt to that style, because it's changing. And
well, Joel, I remember when Jack, not to pick on Jack, because he's not
pick
here.
On Jack. It's always good to pick on Jack.
And plus he's the youngest guy in your band. But,
not anymore.
No? Okay.
No.
Well, anyway, the point being is that you, when Jack first started with you, you were like, oh, I don't,
oh yeah,
he doesn't come to work when there was all this tension, right? Because
I'm not a millennial. I'm an old guy. And it's funny, I was out at Logan Labs, and I was meeting with Susan Shaner, and I kept saying, we got to relax some things. And she just looked at me and said, who are you? What happened? And I'm realizing that, managerially, and this is all of us in this industry, not just, business owners, but all of us have to realize that things change. And the way to be successful and to continue a legacy is to let the change happen and embrace it, and figure out ways to make it work within the model that's now there. I mean, you can still maintain a culture, but you have to be able to let people, like you said, a lot of folks now are going to, live. They're not living to work. They're working to live.
So let's go back a step though. And I mentioned it earlier that we had a great opportunity with COVID. Nobody knew what was happening in the world. Nobody knew in golf what was going to become of this. We, depending on the state, there were crew layoffs, there were, skeleton crews keeping things running. And guess what? Record numbers on the golf course. No complaints that there weren't bunker rakes in the bunkers. No complaints that the ball washers were not on the golf course. And like I said, we plugged it all right back in when things got back to normal. But what of that should not have come back? And what should we have learned from that as far as, a standard of conditioning? And I don't care whether you're talking Marion or you're talking Wilshire. It doesn't matter. There should have, in order to meet the expectations, not only of staffing, but of budgets and things like that, that should have been an opportunity for us to make a global adjustment. I think. Maybe I'm wrong on this. What do you guys think?
I don't think we did a good enough job of, I think we did a good job of pulling all that. Let's talk about course fixtures,
Yeah.
FF&E, right? Furnishings, fixtures, and equipment on the
Right.
Yeah. We went and pulled all the ball washers off and got all the bunker rakes out of the bunkers and everything, stacked them up by the shop,
Right.
And everybody's like, oh, good, I don't have to deal with this. But we didn't do a great job of kind of pre-selling the idea that eventually things might get back to normal and we really don't need this stuff.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
We didn't do it. Yeah.
Which all relates to labor.
Communications wise, we really, missed the boat on that one. And I was coaching a lot of my clients to start talking about it now, bring that stuff up to the greens committee and say, listen, the bunker rakes aren't coming back.
Right.
And some people did that. There's been a few that have, kind of gotten away with it. But we didn't think forward enough and part of that is not necessarily our fault. It's part of it is nobody knew when the whole thing was going to break loose or how that, is it 2 weeks? Is it 2 months? It ends up 2 years. But I think we should have paid attention when we saw, and I know it happened in places like Denver, where I live, is like all of a sudden there's record numbers of rounds, like you said.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, golf is going to survive yet again in a new way.
Right.
And we have to, be in the forefront of that. And I get frustrated because it seems like sometimes the conversations that are happening, amongst the alphabet associations and stuff like that are so non sequitur compared to what's really going on in our business.
Mm-hmm.
And that should have been, on everybody's list of things.
Well, we've got metrics for everything now that we didn't have 20 years ago. So when the next inevitable, economic cycle downturn, what have you, happens, maybe that's one of the metrics when the club decision makers come to a superintendent and say, hey, we've got to find some efficiencies here. We got to make some cuts. Maybe those are the things that we offer up first because we know we can do without them.
Yeah.
That's never entered the conversation in my career that benches and ball washers weren't necessary. That was never even on the table.
Well, I had a golf course superintendent. This is a very simple thing, but I had a golf course superintendent say to me, he said, I realized that we weren't going to have the crew that we were going to have. I didn't know what was going to happen with my, H2B thing. I mean, all this was up in the air. So what did I do? Well, I'm not going to fertilize because that means I'm going to have to mow.
And then you double your rounds.
Right. And then we have all these rounds, but the golf course actually does pretty good. Like actually the grass is pretty good. And actually, I have less POA than I have, things like that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh man, maybe I need to really look at my whole thing and say, I'm
doing okay.
But that's the skill of greenkeeping too, right?
Right.
That's being able to observe the difference.
So how much of what we think should happen is actually costing way more than it should? Because we say, well, this is the norm, this is the standard, this is something that somebody said we had to do, and that doesn't have to happen.
Armen's writing notes.
Armen's got. Yeah, I was just going to say, Armen is about to burst.
At my advanced age, I need to write things down, and I tend to get off topic occasionally.
Never heard of that.
So You know, it's funny. What I called this in our business was there's a lot of clubs that became COVID geniuses because of how things worked out. I would be talking to general managers. As you know, I do a lot of GM searches. And I'd be talking to GMs and I would ask them, what are you doing budget wise? And almost everybody that I talked to was doing 3 budgets, budget forecasts. One about the same as the prior, as 19. One bare bones budget, we can survive. And then one in the middle.
Yeah.
And nobody in their right mind did one with revenues going over the top, membership dues going through the roof. This was completely unexpected.
Full memberships.
Yeah, it's holding on. We don't know how long that's going to hold on, right? As things opened up, as people had opportunities with their discretionary time and discretionary dollars to do other things, we're waiting to see what that impact is over the next year or so, and what the economy does, and to see how well clubs do. But as you talked about, Dave and Kevin, you were talking about, not returning to what we had as far as the way we were doing things before. It happened before. That happened in the Depression.
Sure.
A lot of 29.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
People you were live for that. None of the rest of us were.
We weren't around then.
But all these golf course restorations we see are putting in a lot of the bunkers that came out during the Depression.
Bringing them back.
And stayed out. And then again in the 50s, there was another tough time. So it's happened before, and we're humans. We don't learn from history as much as we should. And this is not going to be an exception to that.
Yeah.
Right.
We haven't learned lessons. We're not going to learn lessons. The market demands are going to return to what they were before.
Right.
It is just that simple, that the human condition doesn't change, guys.
That brings up an interesting question.
Do
you guys think that architecture is following what's going on now? I mean, I'm seeing a lot of new construction work, and a boatload of bunkers are going in. I'm looking at this thinking, who's going to maintain all of those bunkers? There's nobody here to maintain those, So I don't know. I don't know what, how that might happen,
Looks like we lost.
That's all right. He'll be back.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think on that side, I'm seeing that as well. I'm working with, the PGA Tour player, Zach Blair, on his project, the Tree Farm in South Carolina. And, we're doing a GM search with him right now. And they're putting in a lot of bunkers. But when we see the minimalist golf courses going in, bunker maintenance is very different than it is at those high maintenance golf courses. Yeah. This is more about the playability of the game. While we're seeing a lot of bunkers go in some instances, they're low maintenance bunkers. You're not flying mowing every edge. You're not raking these things every minute of the day to keep them in play.
Yeah.
So we're seeing both sides of that, I think, Joel.
I think, Joel, the hard one for me is you take the golf course that is, used to a pretty strong level of conditioning per se. And then architect comes in and sells this, hey, we want to return to the greatness of yesteryear. And now we're going to put in, quote unquote, Mackenzie style bunkers, right? And we're going to do the crooked edges and all this stuff. And they come in and they kind of do that, but it doesn't fit the rest of the character of the entire club, right? It's just, now we've got old looking bunkers, but everything else is polished. And eventually somebody says, hey, our bunkers have to be better. We have to rake them more. Yeah. We got to get in. And I remember we went through this at the Cal Club, we had to shake sand out of the edges a little bit. Thomas came up with this great way with a pitchfork, to keep the sand from building up. Well, we know sand's going to build up on a bunker, but no. With our monuments to architecture here, we can't let them change, right? So now we're spending a ton of time, keeping that, and I'm against it, and I really speak up about that. It's different than when Armen's talking about Zach Blair. I mean, that whole property is based on, the character of the entire property is rugged, right, so to speak. When you think about places like Ballyneal and some of the places that have been built newer that are that rugged kind of thing, but when you say to the established urban club, hey, we're gonna add this old school element. We're gonna put some patina on the golf course when architects. It's like, oh, this is just gonna be expensive.
Let's shift gears a little bit here, and we've kind of broached this, but Kevin and I were talking the other day, and they're like, we were talking. There's a lot of guys our age that are going to be aging out, and a lot of them are going through some pretty rough times. I mean, marriages are falling apart, lives are falling apart. I mean, the stress is really getting to some folks, and I'm not sure if there is an answer to something like this, but we're certainly seeing, a lot of guys really trying to, hang in there and fight through this thing. And is there an answer to, any of these kind of questions? And I know that's a big question, and I apologize.
That's a big one, Joel. And I want to start with that because, I've made my living as an agronomy consultant, soils consultant, whatever, but it was pretty obvious to me, pretty early on that a lot of the value that I held, that I was a safe place for the superintendent to put his feet on the desk and really talk about, the good, the bad, and the ugly of their job.
Right.
Mostly the bad and the ugly. A lot of it was griping about the pro, the general manager, the green chairman, and all that sort of stuff. But a lot of it was talking about family stuff and all that sort of stuff. And I just didn't recognize, how widespread it was. And I just wanted to, hey man, I'm here to listen, and I'm a safe place, and I'm not going to take that gossip anywhere. If the superintendent wants to talk to me about, a failing marriage or whatever, I mean, that stuff has all been part of our business. I wrote about a friend who was clearly having a drinking problem, and the only thing I would ever talk to him about was going to, get help. We stopped talking about grass.
Yeah.
I called him every day and said, when are you going to rehab? Because this has you. And it isn't about, the club at this point isn't about whether or not the greens are good enough. It's about whether or not, you're sober at work.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've had that in our business for a long time. We've had, it brings a certain kind of personality to this, right? It's a often alone feeling kind of person who's surrounded by people, which is a really dangerous thing. And then when it happened to me, and I went through my dark ages, I realized how many people had been talking about it. And if you fast forward to right now, again, a giant part of what I do every day is talking to people about, sometimes the big tragedy of their lives. And COVID didn't help.
COVID did not help.
COVID didn't help. And
isolated us more.
And the pressures of society and, and what's going on. I mean, I was looking at some of the real estate prices in my area, and I'm thinking about what young people make right now.
Yeah.
How do they buy the $600,000, one bedroom, one bath condo? How does that work when you're making 60 grand? It doesn't work. And so people are stressed about those things.
I was reminded of that from one of my father's friends who said to me, we said the same thing back in the 50s. So
sure,
it's all relative, but it's true. I mean, it's a tough time. And, like we broached earlier, I mean, I think our industry is changing, and that this 90, 80 to 90 hour work week is starting to crumble, and it needs to.
I think some of the answers lie with the millennial generation. They know the solution. They've just got to get the rest of us there.
Yeah. Armen, you've been around a lot of folks.
Yeah. Our work life is just like the game of golf. It's never good enough for superintendents.
Yeah.
Ever.
Right. You're looking around the golf, and you can always do something better. And it's the same way on the golf course. So I think that really drives some personality types into a dark place because they can never be good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you pile on shortages in labor and management and all those other things. And whose shoulders does that automatically go on, especially if you're over 45?
Yeah, Kevin, it was, I mean, I call it the 90-10 thing. I have a lot of 90-10 things. But 90% of what superintendents do, the consciously golfers can pick up on. Well, those really good superintendents are working on that last 10% the rest of their lives, and they can never achieve it. And it's, how when you walk into a place or you walk onto a golf course, it feels right. That's the last 10%.
Right.
that somebody's working on it. And so that I prefer the term pragmatic perfectionists, in that that's what superintendents need to be. They need to be able to understand that while you're seeking to achieve it, it's never possible.
Right.
And you have to be able to come to grips with that and understand that that's part of the life of a superintendent. And you have to be able to live with that you're never going to achieve perfection. And a lot of the guys struggle with that and go dark, and their lives change because of that. And they just need a reset on how they look at things. I wake up every day and I think, how good's today going to be? I've been that way my whole life.
Yeah.
But not everybody is. That's a skill that people can work on to change their mindset. But I never had to work at it. It was just, I'm an idiot. I was born that way. But so people need to reframe their personal world if they're going to be happy in their job as a superintendent.
Because on the other side, that 10% is largely goes unnoticed anyway.
Right. It's just noticed by us.
It's self-induced. Yeah.
It's noticed by us. It's noticed by the trained eye.
And that same lesson that you just outlined, Armen, is true in our personal lives. I mean, we're never going to reach perfection in our relationships or anything. We just have to understand that. It's funny. You say you wake up every morning saying how good it is. I go to bed every night, and the last thing I try to put through my head so my brain slows down is, what were the 3 good things that happened today? And it slows my brain down enough that now I can probably sleep for 3 hours, and then my brain will spin again and I'll be back to it. But it's all about perspective, and I think you bring some wonderful lessons. Let me change again, and since we've got 4 pretty powerful agronomists here, agronomy is changing, and I don't, I certainly don't want this to be a EarthWorks commercial, but I mean, look at the price of fertilizer. How's that going to affect, how's that going to change things? I mean, right now the economy is so strong and golf is so strong, it doesn't seem to appear, and being in that part of the business, that it's affecting anybody radically. But if the revenues start to slow down and these prices aren't going to come down, what happens agronomically? I mean, we've got all these goofy agronomic models, and Dave, you and I have talked about this so many times, that are out there. And it seems like every couple of years, there's a whole new somebody with a PhD has decided this is the way grass should be grown. And I'm just baffled by it. And I've got a bunch of old guys with me that have grown grass effectively for all these years. Yeah. I mean, what happens in the next 5 years if God forbid the market does slow down and these prices of fuel and fertilizers and all the other things don't? What happens?
So Joel, I wanted to ask you this, and I knew this was going to come up in some form. And so I want you to think back to when you first made 545. What was the street price, the retail price of 545 back in the day?
Well, no, yeah. I mean, it was certainly a lot less than it is now, but at the same time, it was still a lot more than a bag of urea or a bag of ammonium sulfate.
That's what I was going to say. Right, is that so many people said to me when I was really converting my entire line of thinking to what we all call carbon-based type fertility, is they were like, well, that's expensive.
Cost per unit of N.
Because they're cost per unit of N, cost per 50 pounds, however they want to look at it. Dave, you're just going the expensive route. And I'm like, oh, I'm not. Because I this is an investment, right? And we started talking about things like investment agronomy and, and all that. And, it's still interesting to me that so many people are buying into this idea that, if I invest in my agronomic situation, right, with carbon, with minerals and all those sorts of things, that I'm throwing money away. Like I don't get that, right?
Well, it's radically changed.
Like, I mean, saying you put stuff in the bank, you're throwing money away. No, you're not. Right. Now, there's different ways to invest, right?
Right.
Look at crypto versus money market. Yeah. Account or whatever, but there are, and I don't think it's ever going to change, that, well, look at the food market, the better food that I buy, the more expensive it is, the better sources of protein that I buy, right? If I really want the really good grass-fed beef, it's going to be more per pound.
And remember what, Jerry Brunetti used to always say to me, and he had lecture series on this: food is medicine. And that was one of the last things that Stephen Jobs said before he passed was, you're either going to, eat good food or you're going to eat pills. And, food is medicine. I mean, putting good things into your body or into your soil is going to, return that investment exponentially. Armen, you've been around. You were one of the original. I mean, when I first met you, you were saying things that I wasn't even aware of about how soils can be managed. And you've been doing it for a long time. So you must have gotten beat up even worse than I have.
I never really paid attention, though, to any of that.
Thank God. That's why we have you on here.
I just did what I thought was right. And, Dave and I go back a long way agronomically to where, I consulted for him and then he got way smarter than me and he consulted for me. But, we read all those
Student
books.
Becomes the teacher.
Yeah, we read everything you could read to try to understand these things and get a different perspective on it. Because obviously what they taught us at school, not at Rutgers when Joel was teaching and teaching people the right thing.
They fired me because of it. So don't get too crazy.
But what they taught us ended up in the real world once you tried some other things and said, wait, that worked. And this shouldn't have worked according to what I learned in school. So I started learning things, but I think to me, probably the biggest change was that as I became to understand that every time I used a natural organic product or a product that was microbe friendly, that could be synthetic, that things got better. And when I'm down in Florida and I'm on golf courses, those golf courses that are all synthetics on greens have higher nematode pressures for some odd reason. What a shock.
Shocking.
Yeah. And those that are using a lot of natural organics, some of them have no nematode pressure. And
that's heresy.
It's so obvious. But in order to, we can't sell chemicals if, we do that.
Or get research money.
Yeah, but likewise, going back to Dave's example and the analogy you make, putting money in the bank is a waste of money. I mean, we've seen it time and time again where things get tight budgetary wise, and maybe an application is eliminated, maybe something's taken away. That's when the real value of investing in your soils and investing in those types of materials really, until you have a chance to take something away, you may not even realize the value of that.
Yeah, the bank account analogy is wonderful. I mean, I tell the story often of my friend Tom Briner, who's been on this podcast. During the 2008 recession, he was a club that was basically corporation member. So, and they all left because, they were getting money. So they basically went to him and said, you got nothing, you got zero money. And he survived a year because he'd been working with carbon for so long. And I mean, it wasn't the prettiest place you'd ever seen, but he made it through with, without any real issues because he had money in the bank.
It's a wonderful buffer.
Yeah,
exactly.
I used to do this thing with newer clients of mine where we'd maybe get out 3 or 4 bags of different things, or and just set them out. And I'd say, okay, so now you don't have a budget. Which of these don't you buy? Right?
I hate that question. You know that, right?
No. But I know
usually it's usually us because I can't afford that. That's way too expensive.
Well, or it would be like they actually not, Joel. What they do?
I hope not.
They'd keep the urea and get rid of everything else. You know what I'm saying? Because somewhere along the line, I got to have nitrogen.
Yeah.
And that would lead into this whole conversation about, well, geez, 82% of the air that we breathe is nitrogen. Maybe if we actually fix some biology here, we'd fix some nitrogen. What a shocker.
With nitrogen fixing bacteria. What a concept.
Yeah. And then gosh, if this urea, how much of it flashes and is gone in 24 hours anyway, right?
Burns out the carbon that you do have in your reserve.
And and so, that conversation would have some people looking at me like I had 3 heads and and I'd never be invited back. And then other people would, the light would come on and they'd say, wow, if I had to do more with less, there's ways to do that. Again, going back to St. Andrews, Walter told me that, the budget for the old course for fertilizer was about 1,800 pounds a year, and it had been that way forever. And most of it was stuff that they made, out behind the shop. Right. and he had a bone meal, blood meal kind of concoction, that he had a local agricultural guy put together for him. That was their wintertime fertilizer, right?
Yeah.
Iron, bone meal, blood meal, right? And this is, and so, but they would tell that to visiting superintendents, and the superintendents would just laugh. They knew that they were just being bullshitted, right? Oh, come on, that's just you speaking with a forked tongue. Well, no, that was how it worked. And that's because it's all that it needed. And so that idea of, well, what do I really need? I'm always doing that. If I had to get rid of something, what would I get rid of? And again, superintendents will hold on to water and nitrogen,
right?
Yeah. Everything else,
when I was in extension and working for Penn State, the mantra from the university down was the best nitrogen is the cheapest. And we went out and sold that story until I ran into this crazy man named Jerry Bernetti, who basically spent years de-educating me and showing me, I'm a little slow, obviously, but he literally spent years de-educating me. And one day I put out some 545. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. It was just, okay.
I don't think anybody in the industry doesn't want to, I don't know how many double negatives I could put in the sentence, but there isn't anybody that wants to put more down.
No, I hope
right. And there's a lot of talk about less.
There is now.
Yeah. And we internally talk about just make sure it's the right less, so that you've got, like Armen said, so you've got
my quote from Kevin Hicks. It sits on my thing.
Yeah. So that you've got the buffers to carry you through the and that could be water, that could be budgetary, that could be a lot of different things. I mean, if you suffer a 50% water reduction because of drought, you want that bag of urea, or do you want a little bit of carbon in the soil?
Yeah.
Same thing happens there.
And that's going to be the big one, is water. I mean, especially you guys out west. I mean, it's unfortunable how bad it is.
It is the big one, and it's been the big one for a really long time. And a lot of people have had their head in the sand about that. And it's, unfortunately, the sand is blowing away.
Whiskey's for drinking, and water is for fighting over it, right?
That's right.
All right, let me change gears one last time because we're going to run up against the clock. But since I have two of our favorite people here, I'm going to give you guys a platform to just kind of give me your thoughts of where we are, where we've been. Tell me a story. Give me some advice. Make us feel better about things. And
since the story time portion,
this is since but let's take it to the end of the road. And Armen, I'll let you you lead this charge here. But help us feel better about ourselves.
Yeah. Let's see which story won't get you canceled. Let's see.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I got 100, man. I'm in. I'm done. I'm in. I'm franchised.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Tenured.
It was funny. I was telling stories just the other night.
Shocking.
I was out with Kurt Keebler from our firm, and his wife and her sisters, and they started asking me how I got into the business. And so I started telling the story about, at 12 years old, I had the paper route, obviously, right? And then at 14, Joel, we could get working papers to go work.
I remember.
So my sister friends had, her friends worked at a driver range chip and putt course. So 50 years ago, I changed my first cup, sprayed my first green, and mowed my first green at the age of 14. I guess that dates me, guys. You can all do that math.
50 years. Okay.
50 years ago. So one day I was done work, and I would hitchhike home because I could save the 20 cents bus fare. And some old guy picks me up, probably in his 40s, right, in late 40s. And, I'm coming from work. What do you do? I told him. He goes, what do you do there? I do everything, which was true. I didn't know if I did it all well, but I did everything. Do you mow greens? Yes, sir, I mow greens. When you mow greens, the line's, oh, sir, it's so straight, you can't believe it. Just having fun with some old dude. He was the green chairman at White Manor Country Club. He ended up being the 25-year green chairman there, Max Plants.
By the way,
And-
that old dude was probably younger than we are now. But
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely younger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's an old dude.
Yeah, than all of us. And so by the time I get out of the car, he's like, I want you to go over to White Manor Country Club and see Steve Campbell and tell him I sent you. So that was how I got into the business, was hitchhiking.
So that's see, that's how we got to get new people into the business, is start picking up kids on the street again.
Yeah.
Oh no, Joel.
Sorry, we can't do that. I know that's different.
Canceled.
All right. Yeah, exactly. Eventually.
But that's how I got into the business. And you're hitting on something there, Joel, is that we need to find a way to get young people interested in the business again.
No doubt.
Because we're just not hiring enough young people.
A lot of us came up through the caddy ranks too, like myself, and that was a great pipeline that's gone.
That's gone. Yeah. Sadly.
Yeah. Really unfortunate.
So that story won't get us in any trouble, guys.
No, not at all. But Dave, try to get us in trouble, please.
Oh man, how do I get us in trouble after that? Well, I just, I got a little bit going on the same vein. I mean, I met a guy named Mike Kozak who was, who was the golf course superintendent at a place that was being built, literally down the road from,
Who's been on the podcast.
House. Yeah. And, and I didn't know, I'd never had a golf club in my hand. No idea. And, but I liked this guy, I thought he was cool. And I could, I could do things like run equipment, and I was this big kind of tough kid, and I could shovel sand all day, and not complain. And it was good for football. So, it kind of worked out. Right. And, Mike was obviously, he was 30 the first summer that I worked for him. And other than my parents and my teachers, he was the oldest guy that I knew.
He was 30?
30. He was 30. He turned 30 that summer. I remember the hangover. Well, or the hangover that he had. And we opened Pole Creek Golf Club, and it was Golf Digest #1 new public course, that year. Right. And this was happening in my hometown. And again, I didn't really understand. But Mike was kind enough to say to me one day, like, what do you want to do? And I had some really cool opportunities. I had an ROTC scholarship possibly, and I was a smart kid. And but I grew up in a small town in Colorado, and I knew that there was a big world out there that I hadn't been exposed to. And what I said to him is, I said, I want to see the world, And he said, well, there's nowhere you can go in the world that there isn't a golf course or a soccer field or whatever. So
rugby pitch.
And that really impacted me. And, I look back, and I've had the ability to play golf now on every continent. I've built golf on 6 of them. I've consulted or done something with turfgrass in some way or another in 80 countries or so. And I'm just a kid from, the mountains of Colorado, from a 1,500 people town, who could have just as easily stayed there and, been a rancher, or I could have followed my dad's footsteps a little bit more and been a chef or something. I don't know. But to look at our business with that much possibility, which is what Mike sold to me, right? He didn't say, hey, mowing straight lines is the perfect thing, kid, or whatever. And the impactful thing about that is, if I look at some of the moments I've had, I talk about Walter Woods a lot and what an impact he made on me. But there was a time, Tom Doak had a thing that he called Archipalooza. He invited some architects to come hang out. And one year it happened at the Sandhills, and he invited me to come to speak a little bit about what our soil management philosophy was. And Bill Coore and Ben Crenshaw were there that weekend. It was Memorial Day weekend. And Bill grabbed me and asked me if I wanted to sit and talk with he and Ben the next morning after I talked, and just have a conversation. And I remember sitting at Sandhills at what they call Ben's porch, with Ben Crenshaw and Bill Coore, talking about grass. And I thought to myself, I'm just a kid from Granby, Colorado, and I got a Masters champion sitting next to me, telling me stories about playing golf.
Best architects in the business.
Yeah, and the nicest guy and one of the best architects in the business. And my friend Tom Doak, who was up and coming, had invited me to be this thing. And it's like, and I just closed my eyes and I thought, this isn't real. this couldn't be real. You know, this nobody would understand how big this moment is.
Yeah.
And I think all of our lives are, you know, whether it's with somebody famous or whatever it may be, we've all had some big moment, you know, something that's gigantic. And I think golf affords that to a lot of people, and we just don't know it.
We got to sell it more.
I was on vacation in Mexico, nothing to do with golf whatsoever, and a guy invited me to go out on his boat, and he was bringing some caddies from the golf course that he played to have like a booze cruise. And as soon as those caddies found out that I was, you know, a grass guy, I was an instant brother. You know, even with my bad Spanish. You know what I'm saying? So it's like,
yeah. You know, that's one thing about this industry that I think we all can agree is that it is a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and and it's just a great industry and such. But it's wonderful, and I apologize, but I am running up against the clock. But I should announce that Kevin Hicks just informed us that 30 years ago he started his first job in Arizona, Desert Forest, or 31 years ago, I guess, with Armen Suny.
31 years ago. Were you an intern?
Yep, at Castle Pines. Yeah.
And what was Armen like? Let's end on that thought.
Well, he was actually, technically he was in the ivory tower by then. He was already up at the clubhouse. So I worked for Marshall Faring directly, and Doug Brooks, who's been at Castle Pines now for his second tour. How long? 10 years?
10 years,
yeah.
I was tournament director at that point.
Right.
But Joel, I'll leave you with one story. You know, I got to tell one more story.
All right.
Up against the clock or not.
Armen has.
Who cares? It's my show.
So yeah, 1980, I'm at Penn State getting ready to finish up, and Dr. Dewich, which is what I called him in those years, announces in class that the assistant's job at Marion's coming up, and the Open's coming up there in 81. So after class, I go see Dr. Dewich and tell him, you know, Dr. Dewich, I'm interested in that job. And the first thing he says to me, he goes, "You're not Italian, are you?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm Armenian." He goes, "Well, if Richie Valentine thinks you're Italian, that's okay." He said, and he goes, "I want you to know you're going to be my number one recommendation." That's because I would argue with Joe in class. I mean, we'd have discussions, you know, and that wasn't typical for that class. So I go to see Richie between Christmas and New Year's. And this gets to the whole recruiting thing. Between Christmas and New Year's of 1980 or 1979 to 1980. And the first words out of Richie's mouth as I'm walking up to him is, "You're not Italian, are you?" and I said, "No, I'm Armenian." He goes, "What's your dad do?" I said, "Well, my dad was a dry cleaner." He goes, "Oh, my mom's family, they're dry cleaners." I go, "Really? Who's that?" He goes, "The Tallones." I said, "You mean Andy Tallone?" He goes, "Yeah, Andy's my cousin." I said, "I know Andy." Well, we spent 4 hours together, had lunch, never once talked about grass. Yeah. At the end of that 4 hours after lunch, Richie said to me, he goes, "You know, I wasn't going to announce who got this job until, you know, end of February. He said, but I want you to go back to school knowing you got this job." And at the time I was 20 years old, going to turn 21 or 22, right in there. And we talked nothing about grass. So when I talk about being a cultural fit in these jobs, and I talk to candidates all the time about how they can better express themselves during an interview so that people get to know them.
Yeah.
And with superintendent interviews, guys, I'm starting superintendent interviews on the golf course with superintendents with a probe in their hand, digging into things and seeing when their head twitches and they see something they don't like. So culture is a winner. And you've got to be a fit culturally. And Richie and I obviously ended up being great pals. And but it was a cultural thing. It wasn't all about turf.
You know, I had an assistant that was interviewing for his first superintendent position, and it was close enough where he came in between the course tour and the actual meeting with the board, and he had a legal pad with about 9 pages of notes, and it was all real deep discussions about agronomics. And I said, hey, all those notes you took, hang on to them, but nobody cares in that boardroom. Nobody cares about that. And I completely took the wind out of his sails, because he thought he was going to nail it. And I said, what they care about is, are you a good fit? And it turned out to be exactly like you said, Armen. They don't want to do that every 2 or 3 years. They want to do it once every generation. I think a lot of clubs anyway, that one in particular.
I've sat in on a lot of interviews as on behalf of the club or whatever it may be. A lot of times superintendents would ask me to sit in on assistant interviews, those kinds of things. I've never, my business has never really done searches and recruiting per se. That's something that Armen's done. I've never really gone in for that.
Introductions
and just being a resource, right? So I want to be in the room so that when the One Greens committee guy is asking a stupid question, I can interrupt him, right? Kind of thing. But by far the best interview question that I ever ask in those situations is, what are you reading? What's on your bedside table?
Yeah.
And I had a doctor at a club in San Francisco say to me, it was like a USGA, type and all this. So it's just, that's the best interview question I've ever heard.
It's all about culture, my friends. It's all about culture.
What are you reading? And like some of them like, well, I don't read, wrong answer, and some of them are like, well, I read a Tom Clancy book, and I'm like, okay, that's better. And then some of them are, but they're honest and say, well, I have a lot of varied interests. I've got my how to string a tennis racket book, and I've got my how to, make my computer better book, and I've got a turfgrass book, and, the real kind of things. Right. And, it is culture. It is so much culture.
It's all about culture.
So many people have been so baffled. I didn't get the job, and I am the right person for the job.
I'm the right guy.
It's like, no, you weren't. You didn't. Those guys didn't see you.
Yeah.
They didn't let them.
They assume the agronomic skills, like Armen said. They assume that. We have to.
Yeah.
Who are you? And on that, my friends, I have to close this story down. And I hate to do that, because this has been fun. And I can't thank the two of you, and certainly you, Kevin, for joining us on our 100th podcast. You guys have really made this successful for us. And I promise you both, in either a dual situation or individually, we'll have you back. And Dave, you and I have already talked about it. We got to work up another good agronomy session, because some of our most popular podcasts are you talking about dirt. And I'm the first to say that dirt's what you have on your mind. It's soil that we talk about. But thank you all very much for making this so successful for us. And thank you for your words of wisdom here today. And Kevin, as always, thank you for being such a strong team member and giving us agronomic direction after 30 years of doing this yourself. And we'll all be back at some point in time. But I want to make sure everybody knows that we will be back for another 100 episodes, because it's not just Kevin and me doing this anymore. We've got Jack Higgins and Chad Kuzawal now on the podcast host team. So we got a whole bunch of directions coming at you. And if you haven't been a subscriber, please be one, so that you can listen to some fun and entertaining conversations like our 100th episode here with Mr. Dave Wilber and Mr. Armen Suny and Mr. Kevin Hicks. Thank you, gents, very much for all your support of all these years. I gratefully appreciate it. Thanks,
Joel.
Thanks, Joel.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Kevin.
Here's the next 100.